You don't live here anymore." The words, spoken in an icy, colorless voice, hit 7-year-old Maya harder than a slap. They sounded so casual, as if her stepmother Serafina was talking about the weather, and not about throwing a child out into the street. Behind her, in the depths of the spacious, light-flooded hall, loomed the bulky figure of her brother Caleb. He was silent, but his heavy gaze pressed, pushing out of the house no worse than the mistress. Only 3 hours ago, Maya had stood at her father's fresh grave, clutching his best friend, Julian Vance. The cold November rain had just begun, and now it was pouring down, turning the world into a blur of gray. She was still wearing the same black dress, soaking wet and cold. "Do you understand me?" Serafina leaned forward slightly, her perfect face expressing nothing but disgusted annoyance. "Robert is dead. This house is mine now, and you. You were his mistake, a bad omen from the start. Take your things and go." Things was an old teddy bear that her father had once given her. His name was Barney. Maya hugged him so tightly that the knuckles on her fingers turned white. Barney was all she had left. She looked silently at the woman who had smiled at her father only yesterday. The girl's lips were trembling, but she was not crying. All her tears seemed to have run out there in the cemetery. "Here's your teddy bear." Serafina snatched the toy with 2 fingers and thrust it at Maya. "Now go. Close the door on that side." The heavy oak door slammed shut with a dull, final thud. The lock clicked. Maya was left alone on the wide porch under the merciless streams of rain. Water ran down her fair hair, her face, down the back of her dress. In a few moments she was soaked to the skin. Let's continue our story. Write in the comments where you are watching us from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. She took a few hesitant steps and stopped in the middle of the long, expensive stone driveway. The huge mansion, her home, now glowed with windows like an indifferent giant. It was warm and dry, but alien, hostile. Fear, cold and sticky, began to creep under her skin, mixing with the rainwater. Where should she go? She had no one. Her grandparents were long dead, and she knew no other relatives. The world narrowed to the sound of rain, cold, and loneliness. Maya sank down onto the wet asphalt, hugging her teddy bear. She closed her eyes, wanting to wake up. To wake up yesterday when her dad was still alive, when he read her a bedtime story and promised that they would always be together. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sharp screech of brakes. The bright headlights pulled her out of her stupor, forcing her to close her eyes. A large black car pulled up directly in front of her, blocking the exit. The driver's door swung open and a tall man stepped out. Even in the pouring rain, he looked impeccable, in a dark suit that seemed waterproof. His face was stern, as if carved from stone, and his gray eyes were cold. Julian Vance. He didn't see her right away. At first, his gaze was fixed on the house, on the tightly closed door, but then he looked down and froze. His expression changed in an instant, from restrained rage to pure, unadulterated horror. "Maya?" His voice, usually even and calm, sounded hoarse. He covered the distance between them in 3 long strides. Without another word, he quickly took off his expensive jacket and wrapped it around the shivering girl. The material was warm and smelled of something reliable, expensive cologne and himself. Julian carefully picked her up in his arms, along with the wet teddy bear. "What happened?" "Why are you here?" he asked quietly, but his gaze was already directed again at the door of the house. Maya couldn't speak. She just clutched his shirt tighter and buried her face in his chest. Something inside her broke, and stifled sobs finally burst forth. Julian didn't wait for an answer. Having understood everything without words, he went to the door and pressed the doorbell. Long, insistently. Footsteps were heard behind the door. "Who else is there?" Serafina's irritated voice came through the speaker. "It's Vance," Julian said. His voice was calm, but there was a threat in the silence. "Open the door, Serafina." "Go away, Julian. There's nothing more for you to do here. We have family matters." "Family matters." He chuckled, but the laughter was worse than the scream. "You call this family matters?" He looked at the soaking wet, shivering girl in his arms. "I give you exactly 10 seconds to open this door. You have no right to tell me what to do. This house—" "Serafina," he interrupted, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "If you don't open that door right now, I'll break it down with the police. That girl isn't going anywhere. I swear, on Robert's memory, you'll answer for every tear she sheds." The speaker went silent. The only sound was the rain pounding the porch roof. Maya could feel the muscles in Julian's arms tense. He stood still as a rock, protecting her from the world. Finally, the lock clicked again. The door opened slightly and Serafina's angry, distorted face appeared in the crack. "What do you want?" she hissed. "I don't need anything," Julian replied, keeping his voice down. "I'm taking Maya, and I don't recommend you get in my way. My lawyers will contact you tomorrow morning. You can tell your brother this. I know he's there." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and carried Maya back to the car. He carefully placed her in the back seat, buckled her in with her seatbelt, and wrapped his jacket tighter around her. "It'll be okay, little one," he said so quietly it was like a promise to himself. "I promise." He got behind the wheel, and the powerful engine quietly came to life. The car moved smoothly, taking Maya away from the house that had ceased to be her fortress. She looked out the window at the receding lights, at the dark silhouette of the mansion, which was drowning in streams of rain. For the first time on this terrible day, she felt not only cold and fear, but also something else, a fragile, barely perceptible sensation. In the reflection of the glass, she saw the stern profile of the man behind the wheel. He was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the road, but his whole figure radiated strength and determination. The man she had known all her life as her father's friend suddenly became her only hope. She pressed her cheek against old Barney's plush side and whispered softly into the wet fur. "Dad!" The rain continued to pound the roof of the car, but now the sound seemed lulling. The car sped through the night streets of the city, carrying her into the unknown, which for some reason was not as scary as the past she had left behind. Julian Vance's car slid silently into the underground parking garage. The booming sound of the tires on the wet asphalt died away, replaced by an unfamiliar silence, only occasionally interrupted by the muffled sounds of the city. Julian turned off the engine, and the interior was completely dark, immediately cut by the dim light of the parking lights. Maya, still wrapped in his jacket, had not moved. She sat like a small wet sparrow, huddled in the seat, her gaze fixed on nothing. Julian felt his heart tighten. He was used to business battles, to tough negotiations, to making quick and uncompromising decisions. But here was a child, wounded, afraid, and he had no idea how to heal the pain. "We're here, Maya," he said, trying to make his voice soft and calm. "This is my home. It's safe." The girl didn't answer. She just hugged the teddy bear tighter. He carefully unbuckled her seatbelt, then got out of the car, walked around to her, and opened the back door. "Let's go," he said, holding out his hand. Maya only looked up at him, her eyes full of bottomless sadness and wariness. She made no attempt to take his hand. Julian sighed. He realized that there was no need to rush. He leaned down and carefully picked her up, trying not to cause discomfort. She was light, almost weightless, but you could feel how tense her small body was. They took the elevator up to the top-floor penthouse. Julian led her into a spacious, bright room, with panoramic windows overlooking the city at night. The lights of the big city looked like a scattering of diamonds, but Maya didn't pay attention to them. Her gaze was fixed on her own boots, which left wet marks on the polished floor. The first thing Julian did was take her to the bathroom. "You need to get warm and dry," he said, turning on the warm water in the large bathtub. "I'll get you some clean clothes. Don't be afraid. I won't leave you alone." He went into the other room where his own things were kept. He found his old soft sweatshirt that must have come down to her knees and a new pair of socks that he had never worn. When he returned, he found Maya standing by the bathtub, still shivering from the cold and fear. "Let me help you," he offered, trying to sound as casual as possible. He turned away, giving her the opportunity to remove her wet clothes herself, but she did not move. Then Julian sat down on the edge of the bath, picked up a small soft towel. "I'll just wait here," he said quietly. "Nothing happens unless you want it to, just know the water is warm." After 5 long minutes that seemed like an eternity, Maya slowly, without looking up, pulled off her wet dress. She was thin, almost transparent. The traces of tears had not yet dried on her pale cheeks. She stepped timidly into the bath. The warm water enveloped her, and Maya finally let out a barely audible sigh, which Julian considered his first success. While Maya was sitting in the water, Julian went to the kitchen. He found some baby yogurt that he had once bought for his niece and some fruit. When he returned, he saw that Maya had already gotten out of the bath and was standing wrapped in a large towel. "Excellent," he nodded. "Here, take these. These are your new clothes." He handed her a sweatshirt and socks. Maya took them, and this time, non-verbally but clearly, she let him know that she wanted to get dressed alone. Julian went out, leaving the door ajar. When he returned, she was already sitting on the edge of the toilet, drowning in his sweatshirt, which was huge on her, but seemed to give her a sense of security. "Let's go," he suggested. "Let's eat." In the kitchen, he set a plate of sliced banana and yogurt in front of her. He made himself some coffee. Maya ate slowly, without appetite, but she ate. Julian watched her silently, his mind racing. Serafina, Caleb, his friend Robert, who seemed unaware of the snake pit he had gotten himself into. Julian remembered his mother. He was a little boy when she left, leaving him in an orphanage. Cold walls, strangers, the constant feeling of hunger and loneliness. He had been about the same age then as Maya was now. He remembered that desperate desire for someone to just hold him, to tell him that everything would be okay. No one had. He had to survive alone, to learn to rely only on himself. It had made him strong, but it had left a deep scar, and now, looking at Maya, he saw in her the little boy he had once been. He could not allow her fate to repeat his own. "Are you tired?" he asked when Maya put aside her almost full plate. She nodded. "Okay, I'll show you where you'll sleep." He led her into the guest bedroom. The room was furnished simply but tastefully. A large bed with a soft blanket, a small closet, a nightlight on the nightstand. Julian sat on the edge of the bed. "You can take your teddy bear here, Hermbo," he said, noticing that Maya was still holding the toy tightly. He walked over to the closet and pulled out one of his shirts. "Here, if you want it." It smelled like Robert, he added before she could ask. "He often left his things with me when he was late. This is his shirt." Maya looked at the shirt, then at Julian, and for a moment something like appreciation flickered in her eyes. She picked up the shirt and held it close to her. "I'll sit here until you fall asleep if you want," Julian offered. Maya nodded silently. She climbed onto the bed, hid under the covers, clutching her teddy bear and her father's shirt. Julian sat down in the armchair in the corner of the room, turned on the nightlight, pushing away thoughts of urgent business papers and missed phone calls. Right now, he was just there, his presence perhaps the only thing he could offer her. Time passed. Maya was not sleeping, he could feel it. She lay with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Julian realized that she was tormented by memories, fears, uncertainty. The silence became heavy. "You know, Maya," he began quietly, not expecting an answer. "Your father was a very good man. He was my best friend. We've known each other almost all our lives. He always talked about you, with pride. He loved you very much." Julian allowed himself a brief, painful flashback. He remembered being woken up in the middle of the night by a thunderstorm in the orphanage when he was about 8 years old. He was afraid of thunder, but no one came to comfort him. He cried into his pillow until he fell asleep from exhaustion. From then on, he hated thunderstorms and loneliness. He didn't want Maya to go through the same thing. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," Julian continued, returning to the present. "Just listen. Right now, it feels like everything around you is broken, and it is. But I promise you, we'll rebuild it. We'll build something new, something better. I won't let anyone hurt you." He spoke slowly, considering each word, trying to put all his determination and sincerity into them. He knew that the girl did not fully understand what exactly he was doing and why, but he hoped that she would feel safe. Julian reached out and picked up a thin book with a bright cover from the table, a children's story that he had once read to his niece. "Do you want me to read to you?" he asked. Maya nodded again, this time a little more noticeably. Julian opened the book and began to read. His deep, slightly husky voice filled the room. He read about the adventures of a little rabbit who was looking for his home and eventually found it, full of love and warmth. He read without paying attention to the time, just letting his voice flow, filling the silence and pushing out the fear. It must have been 40 minutes before Julian felt his voice begin to break. He stopped mid-sentence to clear his throat. At that moment, Maya, who had been lying motionless all this time, slowly raised her little hand. Her finger pointed to a picture in the book. It was a picture of a rabbit's house, surrounded by flowers, with smoke coming out of the chimney, and happy rabbit parents standing on the porch. Julian looked at the picture, then at Maya. In her eyes, for the first time in this long, terrible day, there was not only fear. There was something else. A vague, barely discernible hope. "Yes," Julian said quietly. "That's the kind of home it is, warm and loving. We'll find it for you, Maya, or build it." Maya lowered her hand, but her gaze lingered on the picture. She closed her eyes. A deep, steady breath. Julian knew she was finally asleep. He sat there for a while longer, just watching her. When he was sure that her breathing was even and calm, he quietly stood up, turned off the nightlight and left the room, leaving the door ajar. Returning to the living room, Julian went to the panoramic window. The city at night continued to live its life. He felt tired, deep to the bones, but he did not want to sleep. He needed to think about a lot. Serafina would not back down. Robert was a rich man, and his inheritance was probably a huge temptation. Julian knew he had a battle ahead of him. A battle not just for his inheritance, but for the life and future of this little girl who had just pointed out a picture of a house. He was ready for it. He was ready for anything. He would save Maya, not just because he had promised Robert, but because when he looked at her, he saw himself. and he couldn't let anyone else go through the loneliness he had once endured. It was still raining outside, but not as hard. It pounded the glass, creating a monotonous, lulling noise. Julian stood by the window, looking out at the city, which was still asleep, and somewhere, in her room, Maya was sleeping. Julian did not sleep. He was already up by the time dawn broke. Thoughts of Maya, Robert, and Serafina swarmed through his head, giving him no peace. There was no time to put it off. The little girl's fate hung in the balance, and Julian felt a huge responsibility. Today was to be the beginning of the battle. He quietly left the penthouse and headed for his lawyer's office. Julian set out early in the morning to meet his longtime confidant, Artem Zakharov. Artem, a man with a keen gaze and always an impeccable suit, was already waiting for him, standing at the window of his office. The first rays of the sun illuminated his slightly graying temples. He turned, nodded to Julian, and pointed to a chair. "Good morning, Julian. Tell me, I can see from your eyes that this is urgent and serious." Julian gave a brief but detailed account of what had happened. Robert's death, Serafina's cruelty, her attempt to throw Maya out on the street, and his own intervention. Artem listened attentively, without interrupting, only occasionally making notes in his notebook. When Julian finished, a tense silence hung in the office. "The situation is complicated," Artem finally said, folding his hands on the table. "Very complicated. Serafina, judging by everything, is acting extremely aggressively and decisively. She will not allow the girl to receive anything from Robert's inheritance if she has even the slightest chance of contesting it or somehow rewriting it to herself." Julian frowned. "But Robert was prudent, you know him. He probably left everything to Maya. He adored his daughter." "I have no doubt about that," Artem agreed. "Robert has always been a man of his word and deeds, and yet the law is a labyrinth. Serafina could try to prove that Robert was out of his mind when he made his last will, or that it was written under duress. She could find an older version where she would be the heir, or, even worse, she could try to challenge the fact of paternity, which is extremely difficult but not impossible if she has accomplices. She will cling to every loophole, Julian. Especially now that she has smelled the real big money. Robert's inheritance is a fortune." "But Maya is the only heir," Julian insisted, feeling anger boiling inside. "By law, yes, but without an official guardian, anyone can represent her rights, including Serafina. And you, Julian, are not her anyone yet. You are a family friend, but not a blood relative. This complicates your position as a defender of her interests in court. Our primary task is to obtain temporary and then permanent guardianship of Maya for you. Only then will you be able to effectively protect her rights to the inheritance." "So Serafina will contest custody?" Julian guessed. "Not only," Artem shook his head. "She will contest everything. Both your right to be a guardian and Maya's right to inheritance. She will most likely try to present herself as a loving stepmother who cares for the child, and you as an adventurer who wants to take over Robert's property using the girl. She may even try to accuse you of kidnapping if you do not legitimize your actions as soon as possible. We need to act proactively." "What should I do?" Julian's voice was firm. "Tell me." "Your job now, Julian," Artem leaned forward, his gaze hardening, "is to ensure the child's absolute safety. No compromises. And then we must gather all the evidence we can to back up your words and Serafina's true intentions. We must find witnesses who saw how Serafina treated Maya. We must find any documents, any records, any words of Robert's that could confirm his will and her malicious plans. Serafina is not one to back down. We will have to fight. And fight hard." "I'm ready," Julian answered shortly. I promise Robert that Maya will be safe, and she will get everything that is due to her." "Good. Then let's begin. I'll immediately start arranging temporary guardianship." Artem was already making notes in his notebook. "But it won't be easy, and it will take time. In the meantime, you must be extremely careful. And search for everything that can help. Every little thing." Julian returned to the penthouse, feeling the weight of the fight ahead, but also a surge of determination. Maya was still asleep, wrapped in a blanket on the huge bed. Julian quietly entered the room to check on her. She looked so small and helpless in this vast world. He sat in the chair next to her, watching her even breathing. He would be her shield, her voice. That night, Julian woke up from a vague, barely audible noise. At first, he thought he imagined it, but then he heard it again. Something like a whisper coming from Maya's room. His heart sank with anxiety. He quickly got up and went to the half-open door. Maya was tossing and turning in her sleep. Her little hands were clutching an old teddy bear. Her forehead was covered in sweat. She was making small, intermittent sounds that sounded like moans. Julian came in quietly, went to the bed and knelt down. He wanted to wake her, but he was afraid that any sudden movement would only frighten her even more. Suddenly, Maya exhaled louder, and Julian clearly heard the words spoken in a sleepy, childish voice. "Mr. Henderson? Dad, don't." Julian froze. Mr. Henderson? Who was that? And why was she muttering his name in her sleep next to her father's? He racked his memory. Robert often took Maya with him, he knew that much. Where? To the park, to a cafe, to work sometimes. But most often, when Robert wanted to spend quiet time with his daughter, he said they were going for knowledge and stories. Julian remembered. Robert was a great lover of books, and he had a habit of frequenting the local town library, especially on weekends. He would take Maya with him, and they would sit there for hours, reading books. Mr. Henderson. Could this be the old librarian? This could be a clue. A small one, but a clue nonetheless. A thread in the tangle of secrets Robert had left behind. Remembering that Artem had advised to look for any, even the smallest details, Julian felt a surge of energy. In the morning he would go to the library, and he would take Maya with him. Perhaps the familiar surroundings would help her open up a little more. The next morning, after a light breakfast, Julian carefully suggested to Maya, "Maya, do you remember the library? The place with lots and lots of books? Your dad loved to go there. Do you want to go there?" Maya looked at him uncertainly, then looked down at her old teddy bear, which she hadn't let go of. She nodded slightly. The trip to the library was short. The building stood surrounded by old trees. Its red brick facade looked homely. When they entered, Maya recognized the place immediately. The smell of old books, the quiet rustle of pages, the soft light from the high windows, all of it seemed to calm her. She squeezed her teddy bear tighter and looked around. At the back of the room, behind a wide wooden table, sat an elderly man with a kind, wrinkled face. He wore thin-framed glasses on his nose, and his hair was almost completely gray. It was Mr. Henderson. He looked up from his book and immediately noticed them. His eyes widened as he recognized Maya. "Maya, my baby!" he cried, standing up. His voice was warm and slightly trembling. "Oh my God, what happened? I heard about Robert. It's terrible news." Maya didn't answer. She just pressed herself closer to Julian. Julian stepped forward. "Hello, Mr. Henderson. I'm Julian Vance, a friend of Robert's, and I'm taking care of Maya right now." Mr. Henderson nodded, his eyes filled with sympathy. "Of course I remember you. Robert often spoke of you. My deepest condolences. How could this be? Such a good man." Julian pulled him aside slightly while Maya remained standing by the bookshelves, as if trying to disappear among the books. "Minus Mr. Henderson, I need to talk to you. Maya is very traumatized, and what happened, it's more than just an accident." The librarian listened attentively as Julian outlined Serafina's behavior. Henderson's face grew increasingly gloomy. "I knew it," he muttered. "I knew something was fishy. Robert, he was such a good father. And lately, you're right, he's been very worried. He's been coming here more often than usual, and sometimes we've had long talks. He told me that Serafina, her brother Caleb, they've been spending too much time in his office, and he was afraid they were up to something." Julian felt his heart skip a beat. "What exactly did he say?" "He said he didn't trust them, Julian, not at all. He was worried about Maya. He even mentioned leaving something behind for safekeeping. Something very important, just in case. For Maya. Said it was to protect her if anything happened to him. He even considered rewriting his will, but I don't think he ever got around to it. Or, at least that's what he said. Do you know what it was? Or where he kept it?" Julian could barely contain his excitement. Mr. Henderson shook his head. "He didn't say it outright, Julian. He was very careful. He only said that whoever it was for would understand, and that the key was hidden where it had always been, but no one would think to look for it. He said it was hidden where it had always been. Now that stuck in my mind." Julian considered the librarian's words. Where it had always been, but no one would have thought to look for it. What could that mean? Something personal to Robert, something familiar to Maya. While Julian and Mr. Henderson talked, Maya walked slowly to where she often sat with her father. It was a small, cozy nook with low chairs and shelves full of colorful children's books. She ran her finger along the spines of familiar stories. Her old teddy bear was still clutched tightly to her chest. She listened as Mr. Henderson spoke of his father, of his anxiety. And suddenly, in this familiar and safe environment, what Julian had been waiting for came out of her mouth. Quietly, almost a whisper, but clearly, "Teddy bear," inside the teddy bear. Julian and Mr. Henderson turned to look at her at the same time. The librarian raised an eyebrow. "Maya, what did you say?" Julian's voice was soft, but there was a lot of tension in it. Maya looked up at him with her big, still sad eyes. She slowly picked up the teddy bear and pointed at him. Daddy." Her voice was barely audible, but there was a determination in it that Julian had never heard before. Daddy said the key is inside the bear. At that moment, among the thousands of stories stored in that old library, Maya told her first, most important story. The story of the key her father had hidden, and the hope that now lived in Julian's heart. It was her first real breakthrough, the first thread, and Julian knew that now they had a chance. The morning after his visit to the library, Julian's penthouse was tense but hopeful. The key lay in his palm, tiny and cold. He carefully pried open the seam in the back of the old teddy bear, and Maya watched, holding her breath. Inside, amid the soft stuffing, he felt a small, hard object. There it was, the key to the safety deposit box, Robert's last will and testament, his silent message from beyond. Victory seemed so close, so tangible. Julian had already arranged to meet his lawyer, Arthur Levin, the next day to go to the bank together. But snakes disturbed in their nest strike without warning. The calm was shattered by the shrill ringing of the telephone. Julian, who was pouring Maya some warm milk, picked up the receiver. An agitated Arthur was on the line. "Julian, have you seen the morning papers yet?" The lawyer's voice was not as calm as usual. "No, Arthur, I haven't gone out yet. What happened?" Don't go out. Just listen to the headline of the City Herald." Arthur paused, then read slowly and clearly. "Financial predator kidnaps orphan for inheritance. Prominent businessman Julian Vance uses partner's death to seize control of his fortune." Julian froze, the cup of milk shaking in his hand. He set it down on the table, trying not to let Maya notice his state. "What nonsense," he growled into the phone, lowering his voice to a whisper. "This is not nonsense, Julian. This is war. The article is full of dirt. Anonymous sources close to the family claim that you forcibly took the girl away immediately after the funeral, that you and Robert have had serious business disagreements of late. They write that you have isolated the child and are preparing a lawsuit to contest the will. They paint you as a monster, and Serafina as a grief-stricken widow who fears for the fate of her stepdaughter." The blood drained from Julian's face. He looked at Maya. She was sitting at the table, small and fragile, looking at him with her huge eyes which reflected concern. She felt his tension. "That's the work of Serafina and her brother," Julian said through clenched teeth. "They realized I wasn't going to back down, so they decided to strike first. To strike where it hurts most, my reputation. And not only that," Arthur added, "this is public relations. They are creating an image that they will later use in court, and they are preparing the ground for the next step. I'm almost certain that they have already contacted social services. Be prepared for a visit. They will try to take the girl away from you legally by presenting her as a victim of kidnapping." Arthur's prophecy came true faster than Julian could have imagined. Less than 2 hours later, the penthouse doorbell rang. A stern, middle-aged woman in a business suit and a man in a police uniform stood on the threshold. "Minus Mr. Vance? My name is Elena Petrovna. I represent the Department of Family and Children's Affairs," the woman said in an official tone, showing her ID. "We received a statement that you have a minor, Maya, the daughter of the late Robert. We need to check her living conditions and ensure her safety." Julian's heart sank. He glanced at Maya, who immediately hid behind him, clutching his trouser leg. "Come in," he said in a level voice, trying to remain calm. He couldn't show any fear or anger. Any harsh reaction would be used against him. Elena Petrovna entered the apartment and looked around. Her gaze was professionally detached. She assessed everything: cleanliness, availability of food, furnishings. The policeman remained at the door, his presence creating additional pressure. "Mr. Vance, we have received a tip that you are holding a child against the will of his legal guardian, your partner's widow," she began, opening the folder. "That's a lie," Julian said firmly. "The legal guardian, as you call her, threw a 7-year-old girl out into the pouring rain right after her father's funeral. I took Maya in because she would have been left alone otherwise. I'm her father's best friend, and he would have wanted me to take care of her." "Do you have any evidence to support your words?" asked Elena Petrovna, without raising her eyes from her papers. "It's my word against hers, but I'm ready to provide everything necessary. My lawyer is already working on this issue." The social worker turned her gaze to Maya, who was still hiding behind Julian. "Hello, Maya," she said softly, but the girl only pressed herself tighter against Julian's leg. "Can I speak to you alone?" "No," Julian snapped. "The girl has suffered a severe trauma. She barely speaks. Any pressure from strangers can only worsen her condition. You can ask questions in my presence." Elena Petrovna sighed. "Mr. Vance, I understand your position, but you must understand ours as well. From a formal point of view, you are not her relative, and her stepmother, Serafina, has rights to her. We are obliged to conduct an investigation. I will inspect the apartment, and then we will need to go to our office to draw up a report. And Maya will go with us." She's not going anywhere. Julian's voice hardened. You can examine everything here. You can send a psychologist to work with her here in a familiar setting, but you are not taking her out of this house. If you try to do that, I will call my lawyer immediately, and we will settle the matter in court. There was a heavy pause. Elena Petrovna looked at Julian, assessing his resolve. She saw not aggression, but desperate defense. She saw the little girl trustingly clinging to this stern man. Perhaps something in her professional experience had clicked. Okay, Mr. Vance, she said finally. We'll limit ourselves to the inspection for today, but I'll be back, and I strongly recommend that you settle the custody issue legally as soon as possible. Because right now, you're nothing to her. The visit from social services was only part of the plan. While Julian was fighting off the attack in his penthouse, Serafina's brother Caleb was doing the dirty work. He knew Julian might have witnesses to Serafina's abuse of her stepdaughter, and he decided to eliminate that threat. His first target was Mrs. Gable, an elderly neighbor who lived in the house across the street from Robert's mansion. She was known for her keen observation and love of gardening, which meant she could see and hear more than others. Caleb pulled up to her neat little house in his expensive car. He was dressed in an elegant suit and had a charming smile on his face. Mrs. Gable was just trimming the roses in her garden. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Gable," he began in a velvety voice. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Caleb, and I'm Serafina's brother. My sister and I are very upset about everything that's happened." Mrs. Gable sat up warily, holding the garden shears in her hand. She recognized him. She had seen him come to their house often. "My condolences," she replied dryly. "Thank you." Caleb's smile never left his face, but his eyes remained cold. "I'm here for a reason. We're very worried about little Maya, this Mr. Vance. He took her away so suddenly. My sister is desperate. We're afraid he might be pressuring the girl. You know how easy it is to influence a child." "I don't know anything," Mrs. Gable said, stepping back. She remembered the screams coming from the house. She remembered seeing Maya once with a bruise on her arm. "Oh, come on." Caleb's voice became even sweeter. "You're a neighbor. You must have seen something, heard something. You see, in cases like this, sometimes people start remembering things that never happened, fantasizing. And false testimony, especially in court, is a very serious crime. It can ruin the life of not only the person being slandered, but also the one who is telling the lie. You are a decent woman, Mrs. Gable. You have a good reputation in this area. It would be a shame if some misunderstanding led to trouble for you." It was a veiled but clear threat. Mrs. Gable turned pale. Her hands trembled. I don't remember anything," she stammered. "I didn't see or hear anything. I'm busy with my garden." "Ah, that's a clever girl." Caleb nodded. His smile widened. "I thought you were a sensible man. Have a nice day, Mrs. Gable, and your roses are lovely." He got into his car and drove away, leaving the elderly woman trembling with fear in the middle of her beautiful garden. He used the same tactic on his former housekeeper, whom he simply called on the phone, and hinted that her references for future work could be seriously damaged by a bad memory. That evening, after Julian had finally put Maya, who was worried, to bed, Mrs. Gable called him. Her voice was breaking with tears and fear. She told him about her conversation with Caleb. After listening to her, Julian hung up and clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. The newspaper article, the visit from Child Protection, the witness intimidation. They had been fast, dirty, and on all fronts. They had tried to corner him, cut off his support, make him look like a criminal, and take away the only thing that mattered: Maya. He dialed Arthur's number again. "Arthur, they've crossed the line. he said without preamble, his voice cold and metallic. "They're threatening an old woman. They're intimidating witnesses." "I expected it, Julian," the lawyer replied. "That's their style. They'll stop at nothing." "So we won't stop either. Enough of defending ourselves. Enough of reacting to their attacks. Tomorrow morning we go to the bank, we open the safe deposit box, and as soon as we have what Robert left us, we file a counterclaim. Not just for custody. We will accuse them of fraud, child abuse, witness tampering. We will not defend ourselves anymore, Arthur." Julian walked to the window and looked out at the city at night. The lights of the metropolis seemed cold and hostile. But now he did not feel alone. Behind him, in a quiet room, slept a little girl who trusted him with her life. And for her sake, he was ready to go through this hell and burn in it those who dared to hurt her. "From this moment," he finished his thought, and his voice was as hard as granite, "we attack." Word count, 1475. Part 5. "Are you sure you want her there, Julian?" Arthur asked quietly, nodding toward Maya. The girl was sitting in a large leather chair in the lawyer's office, clutching an old teddy bear tightly to her. This might be hard on her. "She has to," Julian said firmly. His eyes were fixed on the toy in the girl's hands. "It's her bear. Her father hid the key inside. She has to give it to us herself. It's her first step in fighting for herself." Arthur nodded understandingly. Julian walked over to Maya and squatted down in front of her, looking into her eyes. "Maya," he said softly but seriously, "we talked yesterday. Do you remember what Dad said about the key inside the teddy bear?" The girl nodded silently, her fingers gripping the worn plush even tighter. "We really need this key to help you, so that bad people will never hurt you again. But for that we will have to rip open the seam on the bear's back. I promise, we will sew it up later so that it will be as good as new. Will you allow it?" Maya looked at Julian, then at her only friend, who had been with her on the most terrible day of her life. There were tears in her eyes. This was not just a toy. It was the last piece of her old life, the last reminder of the warmth of her father's hands. But there was also a shadow of the determination Julian had seen in her father in her eyes. Slowly, with great effort, she handed him the bear. "Just be careful," she whispered so quietly that he barely heard. Julian took the toy with almost reverent tenderness. Arthur handed him a small letter opener. Carefully, with the tip of the blade, Julian picked at the thread of the old back seam and ripped it open a few centimeters. He ran his fingers inside, into the dense stuffing, and after a moment he felt something hard and cold. He pulled out a small metal key on a thin chain. Maya looked at the key with wide eyes. "Here he is, our hero," Julian said, showing her the find. "You're a good girl. You're a very brave girl." The walk to the bank took no more than 20 minutes, but for Julian, it seemed like an eternity. Maya stayed in the office with Arthur's assistant, who immediately offered her cocoa and a sketchbook. The bank vault greeted them with a cold silence and the smell of steel. The clerk led them to the right wall of boxes, inserted his key, then Julian inserted the key he had found in the bear. The heavy metal door clicked open. Inside was a small box. Julian took it out and placed it on the table in the client room. His hands were shaking slightly. Everything was about to be decided. Arthur opened the drawer. On top lay a thick envelope. Inside was a stack of papers. The lawyer quickly ran his eyes over them, his face becoming more and more focused. "My God, Robert was a genius," he muttered. "These are copies of bank transfers to a shell company registered in Serafina's mother's maiden name. And here's the report from the private investigator he hired. It's all here, her spending, her meetings with her brother, their conversations. He knew everything, Julian. He was gathering evidence to file for divorce and take everything away from her. He just didn't have time. Beneath the papers lay another envelope, thinner. On it, in Robert's handwriting, was written one word, to Julian. Julian opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small tape recorder. He unfolded the letter. Julian, my old friend. If you are reading this, it means the worst has happened. It means I could not protect my daughter. Forgive me for that. I am not writing to ask for revenge. I am asking for protection. Serafina is not who she claims to be. She is a predator, and so is her brother. They are after money, and Maya is nothing but an obstacle to their inheritance. I have collected everything I could in this cell. Use it. But most of all, I beg you, do not abandon my girl. You are the only one I can trust with her. You went through hell as a child and stood firm, becoming a strong and decent man. You will understand her like no one else. Protect her, Julian. Be for her what I can no longer be. Your friend, Robert. Julian finished reading the letter and stared at his friend's signature for a few seconds. There was a lump in his throat. He looked up at Arthur, and the lawyer saw not just anger in them, but cold, unbreakable fury. "What's on the recorder?" Arthur asked. Julian pressed the play button. There was a soft rustling sound, and then Serafina's voice, crystal clear and full of venom, came out. "He can hardly stand up anymore. It's a matter of weeks, Caleb. As soon as this is over, we'll throw this girl out to some far-off shelter. She's a living reminder of his past life. I find her disgusting. We'll sell the house, split the money, and no one will remember her anymore." The recording ended. A heavy silence fell over the room. "That's more than enough," Arthur finally said. His voice was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "We're filing a lawsuit today. Child abuse, grand larceny, conspiracy. We're going to destroy them, Julian." Returning to the penthouse, Julian first asked his housekeeper to carefully sew up the ripped teddy bear. Then he went to Mrs. Gable. He found her in the garden, trimming the wilted rosebuds. When she saw him, she shuddered and dropped her pruning shears. "Please, go away," she whispered, not looking at him. "I don't know anything. I don't want any trouble." "Mrs. Gable," Julian came closer, but kept his distance so as not to frighten her. "His name is Caleb, Serafina's brother. He threatened you." She looked up at him with frightened eyes. "He didn't just come to you. He called the former housekeeper," Julian continued. "They're afraid. They're panicking because they know we're right. They're only strong when good people are silent out of fear." "But what can I do? I'm alone," her voice trembled. "You're not alone," Julian said firmly. "I give you my word that I will provide you with complete protection. 24-hour security at your home, the best lawyers if necessary. They won't lay a finger on you. I guarantee you that. But I need your testimony. Maya needs your testimony. She's a child who heard screams and saw things no child should ever see. You're the only person who can testify that hell was in that house." He paused, giving her time to consider his words. "I know it's a lot to ask. I ask for courage. But think of that little girl who lived behind that fence. If we remain silent now, we'll let evil win." Mrs. Gable looked at her house for a long moment, then at the mansion where her neighbors had once lived. She remembered the quiet girl who sometimes waved at her over the fence. She remembered Serafina's angry shouts. She remembered Caleb's icy eyes. She picked up the pruning shears from the ground, straightened her back, and steel entered her gaze. "What do I need to do?" she asked. The penthouse was unusually quiet that evening. Julian sat in a chair, rereading Robert's letter. Maya came up to him and stood silently next to him. She held the repaired teddy bear in her hands. She ran her small hand along the fresh seam on his back. "Thank you," she said quietly. Julian looked up at her. He is now healthy again. Then she did something she had never done before. She stepped toward him and wrapped her arms around his neck, hesitantly but firmly. Julian froze for a moment, and then his hands moved to her back, holding her fragile body close to him. He felt something icy and hard inside him, something he had carried since his own orphaned childhood, begin to melt. There was more warmth and trust in that simple, childish embrace than in anything he had known in years. "Julian," she said his name for the first time, burying her face in his shoulder. "Yes, Maya," he replied, trying to keep his voice from shaking. She pulled back and handed him a sheet of paper from her sketchbook. On it, in a child's clumsy hand, were two figures. One large, one small. They were holding hands under a huge yellow sun. At the bottom, in block letters, was written, "Julian and me." He looked at the picture, and suddenly the weight of the struggle ahead, all the dirt they had to go through, seemed insignificant. The army of light was assembled. It consisted of him, the little girl, the old librarian, and the brave old woman with the roses in the garden, and that was enough. He knew they would win. The air in the courtroom was electric, heavy as a thundercloud before an imminent downpour. Every word, every breath seemed to echo off the high walls. Julian Vance sat up straight, his face unreadable, but inside he was clenching with tension. Beside him, at the prosecution table, Serafina and Caleb sat, their expressions haughty, almost arrogant. They grinned at each other, as if this were not a fight for the child's fate, but a formality they had already won. Perhaps they thought their money and connections would get them out of this mess. Maya sat off to the side, watched over by Julian, clutching her teddy bear. Her eyes were wide and wary, but without the fear they had once held. She knew Julian was there. The judge, an elderly woman with a piercing gaze, began the proceedings, and the courtroom fell silent. Serafina's lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit, began his speech, trying to paint Julian Vance as a dishonest businessman who was manipulating a child for his inheritance. He sounded confident, but Julian knew it was just bravado. Then Julian's lawyer, Mr. Davis, spoke. He was not as loud, but every word he said carried weight and conviction. He began methodically demolishing the other side's defense, presenting facts one by one. His voice was calm, but his questions were spot on. "Your Honor," Mr. Davis began, "we begin with the evidence of Mr. Henderson, a man who knew the late Robert Woods and his daughter Maya for many years." Mr. Henderson, the old librarian, looked nervous but dignified. He sat down in the witness chair, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Henderson, tell the court what you know about Robert Wood's relationship with his daughter Maya and stepmother Serafina," the lawyer asked. "Robert, he loved his Maya very much." The librarian's voice wavered. "He always brought her to the library, read books to her. She was his light. But in the last few months, when Serafina came along, everything changed. Robert became restless. He often told me that he was worried about his daughter. He was afraid that Serafina and her brother Caleb, they weren't getting along with Maya." "What exactly did he say?" the lawyer asked. "He said that they didn't want Maya in their house, and that they saw her as a burden. He said that Serafina often yelled at Maya, and Caleb, he looked at the girl in a way that made Robert worry about her safety. He even considered taking Maya away, but he didn't have time. He loved his daughter very much, and he was afraid. Very afraid for her." Serafina's lawyer tried to challenge the testimony, claiming that it was mere speculation and hearsay. But Mr. Henderson firmly replied, "I witnessed his experiences. I saw how he changed, how worried he was about his child. His sincerity, although not containing direct evidence, already sowed the first seed of doubt." Mrs. Gable was called next. The woman walked into the room, pale but determined. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, avoiding Serafina and Caleb. Julian felt proud of her. She had been very scared, but she had come. "Mrs. Gable, you have been a neighbor of the Woods family for many years, have you not?" Mr. Davis began. "That's right," she answered quietly. "Tell the court what you observed in your neighbor's house." She took a deep breath. I heard a lot of screaming," Mrs. Gable began, "coming from the Woods house. And it wasn't just arguments, it was angry screaming, especially after Robert got sick and couldn't leave the house. Serafina, she would scream at Maya a lot. I heard her call her a burden, a failure. Once I saw her grab Maya's arm and pull her sharply when she just wanted to talk to her father. The girl fell. Robert tried to intercede, but Serafina, she just wouldn't listen. Serafina's face twisted into a furious grimace, but the judge immediately stopped her attempt to interrupt the witness. "Can you describe the nature of these screams? Were they ordinary family quarrels or something else?" the lawyer asked. "They weren't fights," Mrs. Gable said, her voice growing stronger. "They were humiliations, child abuse. I heard Maya cry often, very often. And one day I saw Caleb. He threw Maya's stuffed animal, her teddy bear, right across the yard, said it was trash just like her. It hurt me to watch, but I was afraid to interfere." A murmur went through the room. Julian glanced at Maya. She had been listening, clutching her teddy bear. But now there was no despair in her eyes, only sadness and understanding. She was not alone. She had been heard. "And finally, Mrs. Gable," the lawyer continued, "can you confirm that Caleb, Serafina's brother, threatened you to keep you from testifying?" Mrs. Gable looked up at Caleb, who sat trying to hide his anger. "Yes," she said firmly. "He came to my house and told me to keep quiet. He said I would regret it if I opened my mouth. But I couldn't keep quiet. I couldn't betray that little girl. Now it was time for the main blow." Mr. Davis cleared his throat and announced, "Your Honor, we are prepared to present to the court evidence that leaves no doubt as to the true intentions of the accused. An audio recording found in the bank safe deposit box of the late Robert Woods." A tense silence fell over the courtroom. The judge nodded. A record player appeared on a small table. Mr. Davis pressed a button. Serafina's voice rang out in the hall. It was furious, not hiding its anger. "This child is my undoing. All she knows is how to cling to Robert when he's already on the edge. As soon as he's gone, I'll get rid of her. We don't need her, Caleb. She's only getting in the way of our plans." Then Caleb's voice came, low and menacing. "Don't worry, sister. When Robert is gone, Maya will disappear. No one will look for an orphan, whom everyone considers a burden, and the inheritance will be entirely ours. No one will prove anything." The recording was only a few minutes long, but every word hit home. Serafina's face went gray. Caleb, who had been sitting there looking arrogant, jerked upright, his eyes darting around. He was caught. After this, Julian's lawyer continued, "Your Honor, this recording, made by the late Robert Woods himself, confirms the defendant's malice. I now wish to present to the court the financial documents also found in Robert's safe deposit box. They prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Serafina Woods, with the assistance of her brother Caleb, systematically siphoned funds from Robert Woods's companies, embezzled his personal assets, and forged documents to deprive his rightful heir, Maya Woods, of her inheritance. Here are detailed bank statements, forged contracts, and expert financial testimony. He handed the judge a heavy folder of papers. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Serafina's lawyer tried to shout something to object, but his words were drowned out by the general noise. Serafina turned completely pale. Her face became ashen. She began to choke. Caleb jumped up from his seat, his eyes burning with a mad fire. He rushed to the exit, but the bailiffs immediately blocked his path, twisted him, and laid him on the floor. "Quiet!" the judge's voice thundered. "Quiet in the courtroom!" Serafina, her arrogance gone, dropped her head onto the table, her shoulders shaking in silent sobs. The mask of cruelty and greed had fallen from her. Now, all that stood before them was a pathetic woman caught in the act. Caleb, immobilized, tried to break free, screaming curses. Their confidence in their impunity was shattered against the wall of evidence. Julian looked at the scene of destruction, and there was no glee in his chest, only a deep relief. He turned to Maya. The girl was sitting, cuddled up to the teddy bear, watching the scene. Her gaze met Julian's. There was gratitude in it. Justice, albeit with difficulty, had been served. The judge's gavel struck the wood once, twice, 3 times, and the sound, loud and final, cut through the thick air of the courtroom. The chaos died down instantly. All eyes turned to the woman in the black robe, whose face was as stern and impenetrable as stone. "Order in the courtroom," she said imperiously. "The court is ready to render its decision." Serafina Woods, still seated at the table, slowly raised her head. Her eyes were empty, without any trace of their former arrogance. Caleb, who had been pushed back into his seat by the bailiffs, looked at the judge with an animalistic, hidden malice. He still could not believe what was happening. The judge glanced around the room, lingering for a moment on Julian and the little girl next to him, and began to speak. Her voice was flat and emotionless, making each word carry even more weight. The court, having carefully considered all the evidence presented in the case of Serafina Woods and Caleb Stone, including witness statements, financial documents, and an audio recording provided by the plaintiff, came to the following conclusion. She paused, and in that silence you could almost hear her heart beating. Serafina Woods and Caleb Stone are found guilty on all counts. Namely, fraud on an especially large scale committed by a group of persons by prior conspiracy. Conspiracy to disinherit a minor, Maya Woods, and cruelty to a child resulting in deep emotional wounding. Julian felt Maya's small hand tighten around his finger. He covered her palm with his own, offering silent support. Based on the above, the judge continued, the court sentences Caleb Stone to 10 years imprisonment in a maximum security penal colony, Serafina Woods to 12 years imprisonment in a general security penal colony. All illegally appropriated property and funds are subject to confiscation and returned to the legal heir, Maya Woods. At that moment, 2 bailiffs approached Serafina. She did not resist, as the handcuffs snapped around her wrists. She stared straight ahead, but seemed to see nothing. Her world had collapsed. The other bailiffs were already lifting Caleb from his seat, muttering under his breath, cursing everything under the sun. They were led out of the courtroom, and no one turned around. The door closed behind them, cutting them off from the past and the future. When the courtroom was relatively quiet again, the judge turned to Julian, her voice noticeably warmer. Regarding Mr. Julian Vance's claim for custody of Maya Woods, the court takes into account his close relationship with the girl's late father, his impeccable reputation, and his obvious concern for the child. The court grants the petition for temporary custody. A hearing on the full adoption will be scheduled in 2 months. Until then, Maya Woods will be under your protection, Mr. Vance. She smiled, for the first time during the entire meeting. "Take care of her, the meeting is over." As they walked out the massive doors of the courthouse, the sun was bright and blinding. The air was crisp and clean after the stuffy atmosphere of the courtroom. Waiting for them at the entrance were Mr. Davis, their lawyer, and Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Gable. The elderly neighbor was crying, tears of relief. "Thank God it's all over," she sobbed, coming up to Maya. "My baby, everything will be fine now." Mr. Henderson, the kind librarian, shook Julian's hand with a warm smile. "You did a great thing, Mr. Vance. Robert would be proud of you. He would be at peace about his daughter." "We all did it," Julian said, his voice a little hoarse from the strain. "Thank you, every single one of you. Without your courage, none of this would have happened." He dropped to one knee in front of Maya so that their eyes were level. There were still people milling around them, but for Julian there was only her. "Maya, did you hear what the judge said?" he asked quietly. The girl nodded, hugging the old teddy bear that had been with her through all the trials. "It means you'll never have to see them again. They won't be able to hurt you again. Ever." He saw tears glisten in her eyes, so serious and deep, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief. "And it also means," he continued, his voice shaking, "it means that we will be together now. If that's what you want, of course. I would really like you to be my daughter. We will be a family." Maya looked at him for a long, long time, as if trying to look into his very soul. Then she did something she had never done before. She let go of the teddy bear, which had fallen onto the steps, and wrapped both arms around Julian's neck. She held him tightly, her face buried in his shoulder. Julian hugged her back, feeling the enormous tension of the last few weeks finally release him. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her hair. She said nothing, but her embrace spoke louder than any words. It was yes. A loud, clear, hopeful yes. Justice had been done, at a price, but the reward was priceless. He held more than just a little girl's future in his hands. He held his own, and it was just beginning.